Faza'il A'mal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, Part 21. Ibn Al-Jawzi's Critique of Ibn Majah.
एक हदीस में ये अल्फाज आए हैं, लेकिन अब दूसरी हदीस सुनिए.
Now, the second hadith, this is also narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu.
ये भी तिरमिज़ी शरीफ में भी है, मुस्नद अहमद इब्न हंबल में भी है. हुजूर ने फरमाया, लौ अन्नकुम दल्लैतुम बिहबलिन.
The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you were to throw down a rope down to the lowest of the earth, it would come upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It would reach Allah.
अगर तुम कोई रस्सी लटकाओ सबसे निचली जमीन या जमीन के सबसे निचले तबके पर,
to the lowest of the earth or to the lowest part of the earth. Now, as you know, there's 7 heavens going up, tabaqa, and then there's 7 earths, meaning within the earth there could be 7 layers, or it could be referring to 7 earths, one going down, 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 down to the lowest. So if you...
Here we have an instance of exactly how the TJ, and in this instance Dr. Israr Ahmed, how their epistemology is in relation to hadith. So what happens in this lecture is Dr. Israr Ahmed seeks to prove the theological position of wahdat al-wujud, or the unicity of existence. And he quotes a hadith and he gives it in Arabic and then he translates it into Urdu, and Sheikh Umar Baloch translates it into English. And he proceeds to build the whole of his argument upon this hadith. So here what I will do is I'll give you the hadith in Arabic and in English, and I'll give you in fact the reference to Imam Tirmidhi's hadith, the translation, and Imam Tirmidhi's own opinion about the hadith itself. But it should illustrate to you quite clearly how the TJ use to support their beliefs weak and sometimes fabricated narrations, and they say quite openly that this is something that's Muslims should believe, when in fact it's something fallacious in hadith terms at least. So the hadith in Arabic, this is one source. This particular source is by a muhaddith called Al-Jurqani, and the source is called Al-Abatil wal-Manakir, fallacious and unwarranted reports. And the grade of the hadith, according to this particular muhaddith, is batil, futile. This hadith is futile, and it states that it is being collected by At-Tirmidhi, Ahmed, Al-Bayhaqi, and the particular version that this Arabic narration has is from Al-Bayhaqi. And it says, لو أنكم دليتم أحدكم بحبل إلى الأرض السابعة لحبط على الله. So if one of you was to give or place a rope to the 7th earth, it would descend upon Allah. Baseless, futile, batil, according to Jurqani in this instance. Now let's have a look at what At-Tirmidhi says about it. So in At-Tirmidhi, this hadith, this is the hadith in its entirety, and it's very long, or it's relatively long. And Tirmidhi himself, he says about this hadith, has a similar wording to the one I just read. He said this hadith is da'if, it's weak, and a specific term he uses, gharib min hadha al-wajh, so it's strange to him. And then it continues, this is in Tirmidhi itself. The people of knowledge have explained this hadith, that the person that would descend to the 7th heaven, he would descend upon the knowledge of Allah, His power, and also he would descend upon His authority. And Allah's knowledge, power, and authority are in every place, and He is above the throne as He described in His book. And then it continues, it gives a bit of an explanation which you are at liberty to read. In any case, this is batil according to the one scholar I gave, Al-Jurqani, and according to Tirmidhi himself, it's da'if, and he also used the term gharib. So the question you should have for the TJ and for the followers of Dr. Israr Ahmed is, why are you basing theological positions or theological beliefs upon such batil, futile narrations? That's a bit of an excursion from our standard procedure. I've done 5 minutes just clarifying that point. So let's go back to the thesis, and let's go on this point about Ibn Al-Jawzi critiquing Ibn Majah. And to remind you, we've seen Ibn Majah before in another video, but Ibn Majah contains about 4,000 hadith. Actually, it's a bit more than that. If you were to do a search on Wikipedia, it would show that it has 4,341 ahadith. Ibn Majah himself was someone from Iran, a place called Qazvin, and he died in 887. And Ibn al-Jawzi, the one who is critiquing him, he was a citizen of the Abbasid Caliphate, and he died in 1201 in Baghdad. In any case, if you take the number 4,000 as a rough rounding down of the amount of hadith in Ibn Majah, you would find that 34 out of 4,000 is equal to about 0.0085%. So it's very, very minuscule, the amount of weak hadiths present in Ibn Majah. And the Faza'il A'mal, if you compare it, is 56% weak and fabricated. So that's the information that was given previously in another video. But Ibn al-Jawzi's critique is mentioned in the thesis here because the TJ themselves will not even countenance the idea that their scholar could be wrong, or he could have weak hadith and fabricated hadith in his book. They say that he is a Sheikh of hadith and he is more knowledgeable about his book and the hadith contained within it. And it says here on page 285, in fact, their position reminds us of Ibn al-Jawzi's criticism against Ibn Majah for mentioning fabricated ahadith in his sunnah. Although Ibn Majah mentioned the chain of narration that shows its status, Ibn al-Jawzi said, what is surprising with Ibn Majah is that despite his knowledge, he found it permissible to mention this hadith in his sunnah without commenting upon it. How come he did not hear the Prophet's authentic saying, whoever transmits a hadith from me that is clearly a lie, he is one of the two liars? Does he not know that people will say, if it were not authentic, then such a scholar would not have mentioned it, and he will act according to that. So people like Ibn Majah are not above criticism, and yet the TJ view their own scholar being above criticism. This is something that needs to be addressed. Enough with the TJ, enough with the FA. Now we come to another huge topic, and it's based upon a doctoral thesis, and this was submitted to the University of Manchester in 1996. The title of it is A Critical Study of the Science of Jarh and Ta'dil in Hadith Literature, Case Studies and Analysis. And the author is a man called Mashhur A.S. Iqtayshat. And this basically is a very thorough work related to the science of criticizing Jarh and praising Ta'dil of narrators of Hadith. What does the author Iqtayshat say on page number 22 of this thesis? He says, the biographical literature is extremely rich, especially in Hadith. One has only to look at Al-Kamil fi Asma'i wal-Rijal, which contains the biographies of nearly 8,045 narrators. Lisan al-Mizan, which has more than 5,990 traditionists. Tarikh al-Bukhari, which has more than 4,200 traditionists. And Jarh wa Ta'dil, which has 2,380 traditionists. Then he mentions other books like Al-Kashif, Tarikh Baghdad, Sir A'lam al-Nubala, and again the biographies of traditionists number in the thousands, and the biggest figure is the first one I gave, Al-Kamil fi Asma'i wal-Rijal. 8,000, over 8,000 narrators are critiqued and praised. That's the science of Jarh wa Ta'dil. This video is already getting very long, but I feel it's important for your education to see the sort of criticisms that scholars of hadith gave these narrators. So I've just taken screenshots of selected critiques of certain hadith narrators. So if we look at this table, the first column is the actual individual, the traditionist, the narrator being critiqued, and then the second column is the individual doing the critique, and the third column is the actual critique made upon him. So the first name is the person being critiqued, the second is the person critiquing, and the third is the critique itself. And this is just a selection of the sort of critiques someone would make against them. And examples here is sometimes there's a specific case where an error is made, a person making a mistake in one hadith, a person having a faulty memory, a person who indulged in imagination, whatever that means. That was a critique done by Abu Hatim. Sometimes there are no justifications for critique. So this author was very thorough in the way he analysed this. And then again, faulty memory, made mistakes in a few hadiths, made mistakes in one hadith. Then we have this page, no justification. And then we have this individual here who is critiqued by Ibn Hibban, and it states that Ibn Hibban was in error in stating that Bukhari considered this particular narrator weak. Other examples of critiques of hadith are people who align themselves with rulers or governors. So someone could be critiqued because they worked with the government. Stay tuned for many more parts